Hello, today we are going to be learning about how to use proper email etiquette, specifically when emailing teachers about assignments or grades. So let's get started. When writing an email, you do want to use complete sentences. This is a no-brainer. You also do want to fill in the subject line. This is the first thing your recipient sees. Make sure they know what your email will be about. You do want to use professional language and greetings, and you do want to be clear and concise. When writing an email, you do not want to write like you're texting. This makes it seem like you don't care. Do not be impolite, and do not demand a response immediately. Respect your recipient's time. Finally, when writing an email, do not leave the subject line empty, as stated above. Throughout this video, we will be going over several different components to a good email, and what to do and not do in each of them. Let's start with the subject line. When writing the subject line, be sure to capitalize each word as if it were the title of a book. Be specific and concise, and make sure the recipient understands what your email will be about. Let's look at some examples of good and bad subject lines. Also, throughout this video, we will be constructing an email to send to a teacher who accidentally put in a grade for a book report incorrectly. Example 1. No subject. This is not a good subject line since the recipient will be in the dark and will have no idea what your email is about until they open it and read it. Subject line 2. You messed up my grade. This is also not a good subject line because it is rude and disrespectful to the recipient. You'll be lucky if they even open your email like this. Subject line example number 3. Hamlet book report grade, all lowercase. This is also not a great subject line because none of the words are capitalized. It looks informal and unprofessional. Subject line example number 4. Hamlet book report grade. This is a fairly well-written subject line because it addresses what the email will be about. Every word that needs to be capitalized is capitalized, and it makes sense. Now that we have a subject line, it's time to move on to the greeting. When writing a greeting for an email, make sure you use the correct title when addressing a person. Mr., Mrs., Doctor, etc. Don't use informal language, and after your greeting, be sure to use a comma and skip a line before starting the body of your email. Here's our first example of a greeting. Yo, Mr. Smith. This is not a good greeting because it uses informal language and it makes it seem like you don't take your grade seriously. Our next example. Hello, John, comma. This is also not a good greeting because you never want to address your teacher by their first name unless they specifically tell you to do so. This is an example of a well-written greeting. It addresses the recipient properly, as Mr. Smith, and politely, with hello. There's also a comma and a space before the body. Speaking of the body, let's move on. The body of an email is where the majority of the writing is held. In the body of your email, be sure to provide some brief background information. Always use proper grammar and punctuation, and be respectful to your recipient. Also, be sure to be professional. Don't use informal abbreviations or emojis. Here's our first example. Can you change my grade for the book report? This is not well written. There isn't enough information, and it's kind of vague. What book report? What grade? Here's another example of an email. I'll let you read it by yourself. This is not very well written either. There's too much information, and it's not unnecessary to the email at all. It needs to be more to the point. Here's another email example. As you might have guessed, this is definitely not ideal. The language is way too informal, and it seems like it's a text rather than an email. It's highly unlikely your teacher will change your grade after reading that. One final example. I was checking my grades this morning, and I noticed that my grade for the Hamlet book report was entered as a 9 out of 20, On my paper, it says I received a 19 out of 20. Could you please see if there was some sort of mistake? This is a good email, succinct and to the point, with the tiniest bit of background information. It gets the sender's point across without being too demanding. Now, if you're feeling really fancy, you can also add a small greeting at the beginning of the body of your email, such as good afternoon or good morning. Next up is the closing of an email. When writing your closing, make sure to tell the recipient to get back to you when they can, and always thank them if they're doing you a favor. Example 1 of a closing. This is not that good of a closing. It uses informal language and it's demanding and impolite. Example number 2. Please get back to me ASAP. This is also not that great of a closing. It's really demanding and this task doesn't demand immediate attention. Your teacher will get to it. Don't rush them. This is an example of a good closing. Please get back to me when you can. Thank you. It's polite, it thanks the recipient, and it's not too demanding. On to the final piece of an email, the sign-off. The sign-off is not always necessary if your name is said somewhere else in the email, but it never hurts to add one. To do this, simply use a hyphen or write from, comma, before signing your name at the bottom. These are both examples of acceptable sign-offs. Now that our email is complete at last, we can put it all together. And we get, hello, Mr. Smith. I was checking my grades this morning and I noticed that my grade for the Hamlet book report was entered as a 9 out of 20. On my paper, it says I received a 19 out of 20. Could you please see if there was some sort of mistake? Please get back to me when you can. Thank you. Sally Johnson. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you want more tips for teens that aren't taught in schools, such as cooking basic meals, ironing a shirt, and budgeting money.